Patrick Lecture 61, Week 3. And the focus is self-responsibility in terms of being influenced by others. And the phrase that tends to bring up a lot of discussion is no outer influence can ever make you more distorted. Meaning that whatever is coming out of you was already there. It may activate you in a way that engages more defenses faster than you're able to handle. In other words, you may reflexively go into defense. You may want to defend your image or your reputation or your batting average or the respect other people have for you. And in doing that, you may become somewhat cruel. So I notice that I have an immediate thought when I do something foolish or stupid, and I catch myself, more often catching myself rather than getting caught. There's an immediate desire to blame circumstances, other people, where the moon is in its face. It doesn't matter. I don't want it taken away from me because it's going to affect my evaluation of myself. And I'm protective about that. This week, and the reason this video may look a little odd, is this week I had an incident that brought this lecture home. And that is that I destroyed my brand new 6-month-old laptop computer on Sunday, spilling a glass of water into its innards. So zero cost for the water and a rather large bill from Apple Repair for the entire logic board. I tried to find ways out of having to take responsibility for having done that. I wanted to find solutions, things online. I was desperate to not have to pay for what I had done because I wasn't aware I was at that much risk. But the second drama came when I realized that my backup system, which I thought was extensive, had several infinite loops buried into it, where I was backing up onto backups that were older than I realized. And so I will have to recover about a month's work of data entry and finding new copies of study guides. And I have PDFs, but they've got to be in doc, etc. I shall not bore you with the details. But in the myriad of things I do that I don't write down, so there's no list, I'm going to have to redo an awful lot of them or gradually find out that what wasn't done when I trip over it. I picked up one of this is a card made by an artist in Brazil called The Spiritual Laws. It's a pack of them. And I find that they usually match my needs. So I picked one up. And what I read was, you have to invest in truth, even if it seems humiliating to accept your own limitations, to descend from your defensive superiority and be like everybody else. So that was my Pathwork fortune cookie for the week, and it was appropriate. Now, the protest, but others, other manufacturers, other situations, other dramas, it's always the other. That's why I took a few moments to explain that we're really looking for an excuse. Why is it not my fault? Even if you're dealt a bad hand, the guide talks about, for instance, answers a question about bad teachers. Well, I'm sure all of you have experienced bad teacher, bad mentor, bad friend, damaging work situations where you were invited to twist your ethics, a friend who wanted you to cheat or lie. It's ultimately our responsibility to see what's being asked of us and and I'm going to parallel these two situations. Sometimes we have in our mind created the illusion that there's no conflict. We've buried the potential conflict. We've already leapt over it. In story writing, one of the terms that is used is that every story requires that you reach a little bit, that it's not quite logical. And so one of the techniques, if you have to really jump over a chasm at some point to get your story going, I know that sounds cheap and easy, but it's very hard to construct a story that is perfectly logical and reasonable. And it may take more time. You need to move the story on. So one of the techniques is to have the reader make some practice jumps over small stuff, and then he she might not notice the larger jump you ask them to make at one point. And I have found examples of that in stories, in movies in particular, because they're a business. They aspire to be an art form, and some of them make it, some of them don't. But ultimately, it's got to bring people into the theater. It's got to be done for a certain cost. All the pieces have to meld together. And so the story may not be perfect, and yet you're already moving ahead on it. But the idea is that at some point you may have to fess up to, this is not right. And the reaction will be, but you promised, but you said, but we've got to move on, but we have a deadline. There's all these outer influences to convince you to do something that you realize is not fully appropriate, fully ethical, fully in everybody's best interests. That's on you. It's your job. It's a spiritual task. And it's as if the scenario is being created to find out whether you'll jump over that unfortunate fact or whether you'll look at it for what it is. Now, it's a bit of a stretch, but that's part of what I went through this week, trying to untangle how I thought I was safe in terms of data, realizing that I had stopped putting my laptop on a riser, which had protected it for years from my hand waving. All the things that contributed, they were all small things, small shifts, small decisions, and they met. So I was trying to take responsibility for what I'd done. And all I'm saying is I noticed some squirming, a desire not to take full responsibility for a foolish mistake. When I would drive a car in the past, that would happen. I haven't had a car accident for a long time, but when I had a car accident, first thing you do is but this, but that. It came out of left field. The car wasn't operational. The brakes didn't hold in time. It's a desperate flurry to not have to take full responsibility for an extremely expensive situation. And it's only later that you may be willing to take it apart piece by piece and recognize how most horrible mistakes are not single mistakes. They're a conglomeration. It's a series of misjudgments and bad decisions and shortcuts that get you to a place so that you don't notice the individual ones. And you may not realize where you are in the process. And that's why I brought in the storytelling trick of, well, if they buy this little lie, then maybe they'll buy a bigger lie, and then I can put the giant lie in their way and they'll just want to finish the chapter and they won't notice. We do that to ourselves. That's why that it's not a story. That's why that revelation to me on why some stories don't hang together meant so much, is I immediately grasped that I do that. Trying to cover a lie, and cover a lie until it's just ridiculous and I can't do it anymore. Another point that was made in this section was that negative outer influence will only last as long as you want them to last, and as long as you have the desire to run away from yourself. When you're willing to face reality, you can deal with almost anything. You may have to, like a board game, take a few steps back or start over. In Monopoly, it's oops, you have to go to jail. You have to, there are penalties, and you have to sit there until you roll the dice or you pay your way out. Life is very much like that, which is why the game is so popular. Another aspect is that acceptable proof is governed by your unconscious beliefs. What you want to be true will color what you take in as proof. And again, it's only when you get caught that you are willing to see this and clean it up. At one point, the guide says, if all of this was not true, the world would be chaotic. It would be a jungle. If things that happened to you were other people's fault, then you would be a victim to whatever the other person wanted to do. And yet it's a very difficult transition to see things from the spiritual point of view that you are 100% responsible for everything in your life. Now, one of the things that we tend to blame is, but my mother, but my father, but my family, but my home, all the conditions that made life difficult for you, that held you back or retarded your progress or created defenses in you that you can't seem to get rid of. It's very difficult. I have a hand gesture that I use where it's like an hourglass and you take it and you turn it upside down. I'm still doing that 35 years into this work. I'm still realizing that I'm having it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault attitude. And I have to pull back and say, if it's all my responsibility and all my fault and all of the stuff is coming from inside me, then what's the desire that is propelling how I see proof, how I hear things, who I align with, what kind of jobs I take, what kind of friends I get? There's something in me that is setting me up, but the idea is not to punish me. I know it feels like that. I have felt punished this week. It's not to punish you. It's to reveal what was going on. So to some extent, people say, why can't life be easy? Why do we have to have all this pain and suffering? And I'm going to refer you back to a movie. Apologies, but that's what I do. There was a place in one of the Matrix movies where the argument was, why does it have to be this way? And the architect of the Matrix said, we tried making it easy. We tried giving you everything you wanted. People died. People thrive on challenges. We don't realize it, but we really love them. Now, some of the challenges we face, because they're spiritual and they're deeply implanted to us, feel very, very difficult. But other aspects of life, why would you do things that were easy and the result was guaranteed? There's no juice in it. How can you drum up passion for something if you don't need to try your best or you will fail? So there's a quality of life, the way it's played out on this planet, that meets our needs. We are that stubborn. We are that strong. We need to be whacked on the head that often and that hard for us to address these unconscious beliefs. So one way we can convince ourselves of our story based on our negative beliefs is that we can start our stories from a place where it's obvious that it wasn't fair or wasn't right. I know that these stories can get very involved. I have told my own version. And so I try to simplify this. And I use the same examples a lot, but they work. Whatever situation you're in right now, it's the equivalent of having painted yourself into a corner without realizing it. And once you realize it, you have no viable alternatives except to sit and wait for the paint to dry, walk across the freshly painted floor and paint it again later, I'm sure there are other solutions, but you get the look for a window, look for a door. Could happen. But the idea is that we wake up sometimes only when we are in a corner where the good options are gone and we're only facing bad options. Sometimes you just have to do the best you can in those situations. The idea is don't quit at that point and just keep going. Do some hindsight, do some Monday morning quarterbacking, and take a look at how you got there in the first place. So another term I use for this is baselining, where somebody starts the story from, and I got trapped in this corner and I had an appointment in a half an hour and I didn't want to walk across the floor. The paint was wet and oh my God, what do I do? That's not where the story started. The story started when you rushed into a task without thinking of how the task would be finished. When you didn't plan ahead, like the famous sign, plan ahead, and they have to squeeze the last few letters in. So by starting a story conveniently to buttress your argument, you can make it sound logical and reasonable, and you'll get everybody to nod their heads for two reasons. One is if you get to do it, they get to do it. It's called collusion. And secondly, people aren't trying to trap you and think they're not your therapist. They're acquaintances and workmates, and they've got their own stuff. They have lives and minds of their own and dramas of their own. And it's not their job to fix you. So you can get away with that. And you can get away with it, especially with people who like that kind of story, like those kinds of excuses, and want you to have what they want to have. So baselining, when you tell a story that has no escapable conclusion except for what you already know must be true, consider backing up a week, a month. It gets harder if you have to back up a year or a decade, but that's how long the ramp up is for some of our stories. This is how long it takes for us to build a problem so that by the time we get there, we can't remember the steps. And it's too complicated. So we fight the cause, we fight the effect because we can't figure out the cause. And the last part I introduced in this section was the law of paying the price. Didn't spend a lot of time in it, but the idea is this. Paying the price spiritually is cheaper than trying to avoid the price. You'll have a more fulfilling life. You'll have a happier life. You won't be tied up in knots as much. You won't be feeding unconscious negativity if you just see what has to be done and agree to do it, or agree to take the penalty if you don't do it. That's part of paying the price. So the question and answer lectures are fascinating to me because they go in so many different directions, and the guide is fielding so many questions that he just spends a few paragraphs, even a page sometimes, on the answer and moves on. So it's not 6 pages of information. And some of the explanations that are given in those questions and answers are more succinct than the ones in the actual lectures. Now, it's important to read the lectures so you get the full breadth of the concept. But sometimes all you need is an outline. So these are really handy for that. So, short summary, hope you take a look. Patrick Lecture 61, question and answers on human perception versus spiritual reality. And thanks for listening.